Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 49th audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble channel series. I am the Q News Patriot, coming to you today with hypnotherapist and health advocate Lisa Schermerhorn. My name is SG Anon.
Thank you
Along in
so
this journey, one of the very cool and exciting components is that Patriots are coming together and showcasing their own perspectives, unique experiences, skill sets, disciplines, and talents with each other. And they're doing so and offering such in a way that is so very compassionately centered and so love-based. And that does sort of make logical sense, right? When we look at the events from COVID-19, the various matrix enslavement that has gone on throughout the planet, certainly in the Western world over the last several hundred years or so. It's a very large evil egregore. It's a very anti-love style situation, and so it makes sense that a much higher flying sensation, a much more love-centric and God-focused offering would be necessary to fix the world from that type of travesty. And Miss Schermerhorn is certainly no exception. I'm excited that she's joined the program today. We'll be getting into some interesting topics. Miss Schermerhorn, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me for the second time. We had an attempt to record this before, and we had quite a bit of static and interference. So I'm glad that we're doing this again.
Likewise, and it's good to do the reattempt. It's not uncommon for me on this particular program to need two or sometimes even three attempts with people, depending on the subject matter. We sort of paint ourselves as targets and bullseyes, and I, for one, take a great deal of pride and courage from that. And I'm really excited, actually. That sort of provides a really good basis for getting into the meat and potatoes of the discussion today, if I can use the terminology. And that is this idea of countering the narrative in a physical, real world sense, countering the agenda, offering, potential solutions, certainly very interesting nuggets for people to crunch on, reflect on, potentially employ themselves. And the solutions and the lens that you bring to the discussion around the recovery of the planet, from the big pharmacology and the pharmacopoeia that we've sort of been placed underneath, and the COVID-19 vaccine, of course, being included in that constellation of things. I find it really fascinating where you come from on this. You were telling me the last time that we had this attempt, and unfortunately we weren't able to air that, but in your practice, you attempt to connect to and essentially become the vessel for that great Holy Spirit of Christ Jesus, the great Spirit of the living God, to move through you. And yet you were born and raised Jewish. And I find this very, very fascinating. And if you don't mind, just for a second time here, since the audience has not had the chance to see any of our discussions before, do you care to get into a little bit of your background and what drove you in this very spiritual direction?
Well, thank you for that. And you know what? I was confused on this too in the beginning. But I will tell you, I went down this road, I want to say 25 years ago, because I was deeply depressed and didn't want to be here anymore. And that goes back to a time when I was a young child. I remember being in kindergarten. I had undiagnosed learning disabilities. I struggled in school. I couldn't do my letters, couldn't do my numbers. And if you can't read or do your math and get the foundation down, you're pretty much lost throughout school. So I spent every summer in summer school just thinking that I was worthless. I was bullied a lot. I was always a little different. I was artistic, or I still am artistic, but I always had this, just being different. And I never felt like I fully fit in. And so by the time I did go on to college, and I married young, have two beautiful children that are grown now. But when I was about 38, I'd had a breakdown. And I was going from therapist to therapist to therapist, and no one was able to help me. And someone suggested a hypnotist, and I was like, what? What? I really thought that, they were there to do the stage hypnosis and to make people quack like ducks. I didn't understand that there was a therapeutic value to it. But I was desperate, and I decided to go, and she began to change my life. And what I realized that is that we live in many different brain frequencies, several different. And when you go into this hypnotic state, which is the alpha or the theta states, you're accessing part of the brains where our programming is. And I actually wrote a book called In Every Belief is a Lie. And if you look at the word belief, lie is in the middle of it. And it's all about our programming and how we are taught to believe everything through our life. Our religion, our where we live, whether or not you live in the country or if you're in an urban environment. So many things dictate what our beliefs are. And if we experience any traumas in our life, that impacts us as well. We also inherit belief systems. So there are people, I've gone back with people up to 10 generations back, carrying beliefs and all kinds of trauma going back generations. And we have no way of accessing that on what we call beta, which is where we're at now. So I began to go on this journey of studying, and this woman was not only a hypnotist, she was a master practitioner in NLP. So I went on to do that. She studied all kinds of metaphysical techniques. I went on to study those. I studied energy medicine, and it just continued. It was like an obsession for me. I couldn't stop. And I felt that I had this need to help others because I knew that there were other people who were suffering just as I was and weren't getting the help that they needed. So I went on this journey, and the woman who I did the hypnosis class with, the hypnosis sessions with, she was teaching classes about basically praying and asking for help, communicating with ascended masters and angels. And I was like, that's a thing. Like you could actually do that. I was fascinated. So I took this class, and every week we would pick 7 different ascended masters, read about them, pray and ask for help, and then we would regroup and people would start talking about miracles that were happening in their lives. So I got to the J's, and because I was raised Jewish, I was not familiar with Jesus. And so I asked for a sign that he was with me. So I have this deck of cards. It was Doreen Virtue Angel Messenger card deck. And I opened it up. It was brand new, and I spread out the cards, and the cards were showing these beautiful, illustrations. And those are upside down, but and then I asked for a sign that Jesus was with me, and this card popped out that wasn't in it before. So you see the number 7 and God.
Remarkable.
And I sat there and I was like, I don't even know what to do with this. And I just chalked it up to coincidence. And that morning, I took my daughter to the ski mountain for lessons. And while she was getting fitted with her equipment, I was outside, and there were these 2 speakers that were playing heavy metal music. And they were all of a sudden, they switched and played this song called Christ's Love. I've never found that song again, but I was completely enveloped in this light and love. And I went into a state of euphoria, and time stood still. And I remember just being in that state of just unconditional love. It gets me emotional every time I talk about it. And when it was complete, I was back in the middle of all of these people, and the heavy metal music came back on, and I said, okay, I have to investigate this further. I don't know what this is. And the woman who taught me hypnosis told me she was a former Episcopal nun, and she did these trips to Medjugorje. And Medjugorje is a place in Bosnia where there was an apparition of Mother Mary. And people in the 80s, she appeared before several children, and people go there on pilgrimages from all over the world. There are spontaneous healings that happen. It's an amazing place. And my instructor told me that Mother Mary had come to her and said that I was going to be in Medjugorje in 5 years. And I just sat and laughed, because I said, why would I be going to this sacred place that's obviously a Christian place or Catholic place where people go on these pilgrimages, and don't they still have landmines there? This was something that was just, I tucked it away in the back of my mind, but I didn't really think much of it. And then 4 years later, I spoke to my then husband, and I asked him for our 20th wedding anniversary if he would be willing to go on a trip to Europe. And he said he would if I would go on the back of a motorcycle. And I said, okay. And he said, let's do some research, figure out where we want to go. So he did some research and I did, and he came back from a weekend of, it was a motorcycle rally, and handed me a brochure and said, I found where we're going, Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia. He found the trip.
Incredible.
And 5 years exactly to the month that she told me that I was going to be there, I was there. And there was an incredible day of miracles that got us there, but we don't have time for that. So I have been to Fatima. Jesus shows up in my healings. I consider myself very spiritual. I'm not religious, but I work with him on a regular basis. And there are some incredible experiences that I have when I work with him.
Well, just the story that you've related over the last couple of minutes is itself incredible. The odds of it being 5 years exactly to the month, right? This is sort of a prophetic statistical impossibility, and that sort of confirms to us that there is a grander, spirit of the living God, that we are, in some regards, I think, connected and sensitive to that. And indeed, on this program, I've made the case for a very long time that the only reason you have an occultic power structure that harbors such vitriol and disdain for humanity is because of who humanity truly is at its core. It's jealousy. It's motivated by envy and strife and the inability to literally compete with who we are and what our beautiful genome has allowed us to be. And that, sort of that leads me into my next question, which is this discussion about hypnotherapy and health and frequency and spirit, and the blending of this, this broad arching sort of topic matter. When you were talking a moment ago about brain states and brain waves, I think many people out there are familiar with the different states of the brain. They're familiar with children as they grow up. If people out there have had like a basic, child developmental psychology class, that brain in those children actually changes through various influential states as they grow, and the adolescent, pubescent period of time sort of concretes and solidifies whatever changes and understandings have been absorbed into the child at that, by that period in time. And so that alone sort of testifies to the idea that frequency has a significant impact on how we interface with the world. And indeed, frequency is sort of the number, or excuse me, the word that's on the lips of a lot of people out there right now in the alternative health world, certainly in the physics world. The word quantum is sort of everybody's, fallback now for trying to understand these esoteric topics. So on that, having said all of that, do you care to give sort of your professional overview about how these topics blend?
It's very, how do I explain this? For someone who's never experienced this before, it can be very hard to wrap your head around it. And that's why I always say to people, you have to get out of your head and drop into your heart and go into the knowing. Because if you try and analyze it, you'll never try and figure out how it works. Because when you get into the areas of quantum physics and being able to move through time, you can time travel, go back in time. I've had people where I've worked with going back into utero, and where the mother was going through some kind of difficult time, and the fetus was unwanted at the time, and those people were born with the feeling of being unwanted and have no way to access in their beta state, which is where we're at now, that this was something that programmed them, that they came into the world unwanted. But using hypnosis, all I do is slow down the brain. We're just going into another state. So from beta, we go to alpha, and alpha is that daydream state. And people say, oh, I can't be hypnotized. Well, if you've daydreamed and passed an exit, you've been in hypnosis. If you've meditated, you've been in hypnosis. It's just another word for guided meditation. So these states are places where you can access these memories, access these programs that are part of us, and be able to release it. And one of the things that I do is something called timeline, where I will take people throughout their lives and release these programs, because we become a giant magnet. And when we have something happen to us, let's say we believe that we're unwanted, we will continue to recreate situations where we're unwanted until we heal it. And once we heal it and we have a new perspective on it and we shift and we change it, then we suddenly end up in scenarios where we are wanted. It's the same thing with feeling that you can't trust people. Then you keep meeting people who you can't trust. So these are the beliefs, these are those things that hold us back, that keep us on that hamster wheel doing the same thing over and over again.
That's powerfully compelling, and it makes a great deal of sense when we start talking about things like predictive social programming or conditioning, neurolinguistic programming. All of this being the weaponization really of the power of sleight of hand and the human sensory systems and that deep, deep perception that we have that goes far beyond just our peripheral physical vision. Um, and that I think an expanded understanding of who we are and how we function is sort of crucial at this point in time as we look at what humanity is going to become as a result of the events over the last, say, 4 to 6 years. I would submit much, much longer back than that, but publicly for the last 4 to 6 years, we have a tremendous change that has been acknowledged and sort of heaped onto the world. And so that gets me into, another question here, which is about the crime of COVID-19 and how we answer that, in a appropriate, spiritually centered way, but we also don't necessarily allow that, to go unacknowledged or unpaid for, if you will, if we could utilize the terminology. I'm trying to be very sort of friendly and broad here in my lingo. So with the C-19 vaccines, the kill shot campaigns that we saw, and the degradation of the human genome and things like this, you're talking about hypnosis being sort of a frequency meditation, a pausation of thought to help encourage the body back into its natural spiritual balance. And I think the two of them sort of kind of blend very well. But you were talking to me at one point in time as we got this show, sort of on the road here and ready to go, that the channeling of the Spirit of Christ Jesus and that deep unconditional love that is who all of us really truly are. That's an integral part to your approach to helping people reconnect their bodies and their genome and who they spiritually are after the DNA level assault that came from these injections. Do you care to maybe give us a little bit of an overview of how you approach that while I prepare some slides?
Sure. So what happened was I was on a podcast with Brad Wasney. He's the Sovereign Soul Show, and he had these guests on. They're called the Venus Twins, Georgie Boma and Claire Woodley, and they spent 2 years developing, channeling this healing. And they were talking about this healing on the show, and all of a sudden, I just was overcome with emotion. And after the show, I said to them, I need to be trained in this. I really want to help people. And because what they were doing is bringing people, the name of the healing is called Return to Sovereignty in God. So it's based in a healing that's taking you back before you were vaccinated. And I know that's really hard to believe. So I just ask people to hear me out, because what happened was I struggled with that too. And I did the training and I started doing the healings, and people were giving me anecdotal evidence of going through a detox over 10 days. And I was really excited about the results that I was getting, but I wanted proof. So I talked to a friend of mine who's a functional medical, she's involved in chiropractic, functional medicine, and I asked her, what's the best way for me to determine, just to get a sense of a difference between the before and after? And she recommended live blood analysis or dark field microscopy, because when people are vaccinated, it was creating these blood clots. So the red blood cells were clumping together. You'd be able to see the difference. Well, I looked into it, and lo and behold, in the state that I live in, it's illegal for you to look at your own blood. And I found out that there's many states that this test is illegal. And I live near the border of Canada and in Montreal, and that's illegal there. So I had a friend who offered to do the test, and this was her blood. She had one vaccine and one booster. So this was her blood beforehand. And the way we did this is she was on FaceTime and I was taking screenshots. So forgive me for the quality of this. I had no idea what I was looking at. But if you look at the colors, you see a yellow glow. And that yellow glow came to my attention through Dr. Carrie Madej talking about something that was put into the vaccines called luciferase, which was disconnecting people from source and reconnecting them to what we call the false light. And what I found is people were having trouble meditating, they were having trouble praying. And for people who are other healers who could see people's energy fields, they could see and become. So this is why it's really important. And so that was the before of Jennifer. And then the after, this was 10 days later. And we stayed in touch. She kept me posted on the difference between how she was feeling and as she was going through the detox. So I don't know if you have the after, you want me to tell her story. There we go. Yeah, so this is her blood afterwards.
This is remarkable.
So
The
this
color
is
change
quite
is
a
plain on its
significant change.
face.
Yeah, and this was 10 days. So what she had told me is she was using products. She was using some scalar wave technology over 2 years to help her with the vaccine symptoms. She was using different products, and yet she still had pain from her arms, down her arms, tightness, soreness since she had that vaccine, and her shoulders were very tight. She went for massage right after the healing, and the massage therapist asked her what she had done because she was blown away by the difference in her, that the pain was now gone in her arms. And she had had that pain in her arm for 2 years. So it was the anecdotal, and then I had the before. So Jennifer came to me and said, I have another friend. He has he was considered a first responder. He got the vaccine early before everyone else did, and then he went on to have 3 boosters. Since then, he was having symptoms of MS. He was tremendous amount of weakness in his legs. It would take him 2 minutes to get out of bed. And he came in and had his blood looked at. So that was his blood beforehand. So he had not done anything that I'm aware of, any of frequency healing or anything. So this is how clumped his blood was.
I'm not a medical practitioner.
And
I'm not an
when
expert.
I did the healing with him,
I apologize. We had a slight audio delay there. I was saying I'm not a practitioner or an expert whatsoever, but this particular slide looks very sick. The color, the green is very plain. And it almost looks like the cells, they really don't have any sort of cohesive uniformity anymore.
yeah, they were very clumped together, so he wasn't getting the proper nutrition, proper oxygenation. Yeah, he was very sick. He would get out of breath just walking, into a store. He was having to use a walker at some. So now the incredible thing was that during the healing I had with him, and every single person has a different experience. But what I will say in my third eye, water coming through and going into his crown, going through his body and cleansing him. And there were this dark, murky water coming out his feet, and it was getting stuck in his abdomen, and Jesus came next to me, and two of us were pushing this water through. And as we were pushing this water, the water continued until it was clear. I checked in on it. He woke up, he was really nauseous. He got to the bathroom and he threw up volumes of clear water. And he said, I don't know where that came from. I didn't have any water before I went to bed, nothing in the middle of the night. This was first thing in the morning. I don't know where all that water came from. So I told him about my experience during the healing with the water coming through him, and he said, that's so interesting. During the healing, I had images of water turning from murky to clear.
I apologize, Ms. Schermerhorn. On this end, we did have a significant audio interruption and cyber interruption once again, unsurprisingly. But the flavor of what you were just saying, I want to highlight for the audience out there who may have missed what you were relaying. You said during the performance of this particular healing session that you had, not FDA approved, of course, but during this particular session, there was this powerful vision of water that was running through the gentleman in question, and it was you. And you said that you felt the spirit of Jesus come alongside you, and so the two of you were attempting to move this clear water through the being and what you were seeing coming out the bottom of the man, again in a vision sense, was this murky water that became clear. And then after the session, you said that this gentleman actually contacted you and stated that he vomited clear water. Is that correct?
Yes, volumes of it. And he did not have any water when he went to bed. This was first thing that he woke up, and he had no idea where that came from. And during the healing, he told me that he had, and that's his after. So he had visions of murky water turning clear beforehand. So this was, it was 11 days exactly after the healing. That is his blood.
This is
And
remarkable and doesn't
yeah,
even look like the same patient.
no. And he had had an episode 2 weeks before. We had collapsed in his kitchen on the floor for 11 hours. He was too weak to get up. So I've spoken to him. He's doing better. He still has some foggy brain, but he hasn't had any more episodes of weakness in his legs, and he's doing much better.
Well, as we're having this conversation, I'm struck by a couple of sort of obvious, observances, if you will. The first observance, of course, is the importance of the conversation, because the cyber interruption on my end has been particularly aggressive with this particular talk now twice in a row, and that's not unusual, but it is at the same time a tad unusual with the amount of intensity about it. And the other observation I've got here is that the blending of frequency medicine, frequency healing, quantum medicine, I think you could even say bioscalar, light wave, or light speed based medicine, right? We're all sort of talking about the same thing. And what we're talking about is reconnecting the physiological apparatus that all of us are to that broader power that sustains our very being, that causes our hearts to beat, our cells to
Mm.
respirate, our body to move, right? We don't have to consciously think, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Our body does a great deal of this for us. And that Holy Spirit of the living God sustains that in my own personal belief system and my own estimation. So with that being said, I guess moving into the closing segment here, because what you were just describing about spiritual healing with physiological live blood analysis evidence is extraordinarily compelling. Where in the world do we, the people, go from here as far as trying to reconnect ourselves, both, personally and perhaps even in our communities, with who we really are as it pertains to our health?
Well, our body hears our thoughts, okay? And I tell this to all my clients and people I'm around. When we beat ourselves up, our body hears that. So the first and most important thing is we have to love ourselves. I have a friend who used to say if a policeman heard what she said to herself every morning in the mirror, she'd be arrested for assault and battery. It's really important that we love ourselves. And then we need to believe in a higher power, that there are miracles and God, and love each other. We have been divided on both ends. There's divisiveness within people on the right, there's divisiveness in the people on the left, and everything in between. And what I will say is, we are not going to heal. Humanity is not going to heal until we can come together and love each other. I had someone say to me that, they wanted revenge because they were, ostracized and all this pain because they didn't get vaccinated and they didn't get to go to different, events in their family, and they were in so much pain. And I said, they were doing the best they could with what they had. My father kept contacting me, begging me to get vaccinated. And instead of getting angry, I said to him, thank you for loving me that much, because his doctor told him that I was going to die if I didn't get vaccinated. So we need to come from a place of love and love ourselves, love each other, and forgiveness. And that is the number one lesson that I have learned through my work with Christ is forgiveness. And it's not about that it's okay what someone did, but it's about letting go and not carrying it anymore, because the only person who suffers is the person that holds on to the resentment and anger.
My late grandmother used to say that, anger and hatred is like drinking a chalice of poison and expecting the other person to die. And I think that's a very salient point, sort of piggybacking off what you're talking about, because that was the core of Jesus Christ's message. Love one another and love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, and soul. Ms. Schermerhorn, this has been a fantastic conversation. I do want to go ahead and start closing it out so that we don't get cyber interrupted to the point where it's not usable anymore. But I want to give you the chance to, let people know where they can find you and where they can reach out to you for questions, contact, or further information.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the third or fourth time it's happened. As soon as I start to talk about the spiritual healing, the podcast get interrupted. It's not surprising to me. I can be reached on my website, lisamindset.com. And I don't have a lot of information about this healing yet. It's in process. I stay very neutral. I do have a show on Rumble called Where Truth Lies, and I'm also on the Grassroots Warrior Network. And that is also my show, Where Truth Lies. And I put all of my interviews on a separate, and please like and subscribe, because I'm trying to grow that channel. I really appreciate it. And the Venus twins, if you want to do the training, you can do it online. They're out of Australia, and it's the Return to Sovereignty in God Vaccine Injury Healing. And you can go on their website, wisdomhealing.com.au. And it's a beautiful healing. I had an incredible activation when I went through this healing. They are very loving, kind, two women who have devoted 2 years to putting this together. And the program is really well done. And if anyone has any questions, they can reach me, Lisa Schermerhorn, and the number 1@gmail.com. I'm happy to talk to them about the healing, or if they're interested in having the healing themselves. You must believe that this will work in order for it to work. You must believe in God, because it will not happen. You are the one who are changing your own cells through this process.
Faith without works is indeed dead. And Ms. Schermerhorn, it has been a true privilege to have you on and discuss your actions and your works, as well as your faith and perspective. For the audience out there, I hope you very much enjoyed our conversation. I'll be back with each of you again soon on the Q News Patriot. Stay safe, everyone. This is SG Anon. Thanks. Bye-bye.